They have the excess skin because of their failures. Good afternoon, friends. If any of you have ever been fat, you may have noticed that it's a little bit difficult to get rid of the last amounts of extra skin. I think I know why. In this video, I'm going to tell you how to get rid of extra skin. But before I do, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already, like the video, and comment on the video for the sake of the algorithm. Now let's get started. First of all, why you should listen to me. For those that don't know, I've lost 50 to 60 pounds within a very short amount of time, between 4 to 8 months. 6 times in my life. Only one of those times was it muscle. The other times it was fat, beginning when I was 16 years old. The first time I ever did this was probably in the summer of 10th grade. Just before I entered 11th grade, or maybe it was in the fall semester of 11th grade. I was making a major life change, having been a really delinquent youth, and I had become religious at the time. And along with being religious, I wanted to be healthy. I was only 5'10", but I weighed 210 pounds, and at that age I didn't have much muscle at all. So I was basically fat, and I wanted to be a bit healthier. I'm a person who has extreme dedication and discipline when I believe in something. So I was able to lose 60 pounds, I think it was, in about 4.5 months, which shocked everybody in school. I don't think anyone in my school that young had ever seen somebody lose so much weight. In fact, that's the first time I was told you look like and act like a completely different person. I've been told this many times in my life, almost being unrecognizable between pictures over time. So I've lost a lot of fat many times, and I've also lost a lot of muscle. Now twice. I'm now losing more muscle because I've been fasting very actively, and I honestly stopped training with weights because I was a little bit distracted and busy. So anyway, the point is, over time I developed loose skin almost anywhere you can develop it because I was both fat and muscular. My arms have loose skin, my neck has loose skin, my hips have a bit of loose skin. And over time I was able to see how much loose skin I lost each time I lost the weight, depending on whether I had muscle, depending on how I ate, and depending on how much weight I lost in total. I learned some lessons and I want to share them with you. First, the cells in your skin can atrophy over time. They can get smaller, and when they're smaller, this usually precedes what I'm about to talk about next, which is programmed cell death, also called apoptosis in biology. Apoptosis happens when your body is in stressful conditions and when certain nutrient sensing pathways like mTOR are turned off for extended periods. So for example, when you fast for 5 days, you experience a lot of apoptosis of cells. Usually the programmed cell death regards cells that are considered damaging to your body. So this is probably not the main mechanism that causes the death of skin cells. Instead, because protein is what mostly composes your skin is actually a resource for your body. It's one of the ways your body stores protein. Many bodybuilders, for example, think that you don't store protein. No, indeed, you do store protein. Your body is made out of protein. And in fact, your body consumes from these reserve proteins when it needs to. In particular, when growth sensing pathways like mTOR are turned off and your body is stressed out. During these circumstances, your body does what's called autophagy. It's a biological process of consuming your own proteins. By the way, the etymology of the word autophagy is auto, yourself, and phagy, which is eat. If you guys notice, I try to define these words so that you remember them and understand them. I found the study of etymology, the root origin of words, to be very useful for myself in remembering what words mean. Unfortunately, I learned this only after I completely finished all of my degrees, so I've never really benefited from this in school. So I hope the younger people listening to this learn that etymology is a very useful way to learn about words that you don't know. You can encounter a word and sort of figure out what it means. For example, I've never even looked up the word autophagy. I just know what the root words from Greek mean because English borrows a lot of its words from French, and which originate from Latin, which originate from Greek, or it borrows them directly from Latin. In a later period in England, the English started just making up words directly from Latin. This was when the scientific boom started after the Renaissance. But before that, a lot of words were imported from French and therefore came from Latin and therefore came from Greek. Anyway, the study of etymology is very useful. I highly recommend it to you younger people that are still in school. Anyway, back to what we were saying. So cells can get smaller, they can be killed, and they can, because their proteins can be eaten and recycled in our bodies. But I believe that to get the autophagy of skin, to be able to shrink the skin properly, it seems to be that there is some functional role of small fat cells in the interior of the skin, such that when you don't lose all your fat, not all your fat, but a lot of your fat, when you don't really go into low nutrient conditions for a long time, what happens is that these cells that you had, the fat cells, atrophy but remain in the skin. So there's a lot of cells there. I believe this prevents the binding of connective tissue in the skin to the actual body. So for example, I learned that plastic surgeons, when they work on obese people that have lost a lot of weight, sometimes put their, I don't know what device it is, but some metal device inside the layer between the skin and the body. And they scrape the inside of the person's skin. I think that they do this to create scar tissue that causes the skin to bind to the body. But it may also displace these fat cells, allowing natural processes to bind the skin to the body. So how do you lose extra skin? It's really difficult to do if you haven't really starved yourself a lot. If you've been eating pretty consistently through the day, or if you have a little bit of subcutaneous fat, it won't happen. Especially if you're a little bit older, once you get into your 20s, and especially if there's a lot of skin. It will not happen majorly if you don't really go into low nutrient conditions for a long time. And low nutrient conditions also mean low protein diets, and they also mean long periods between eating. Your body, when it has an excess of proteins being consumed and excess of muscle as well, it may target these skin proteins a little bit less. And if you've lost a dramatic amount of weight where you have a lot of excess skin, and particularly if you're past the age of 20, having a lot of muscle or eating frequently or eating a high protein diet will prevent this from happening. That's why I always recommend that people that are doing major weight loss programs like I've done myself in the past, do not lift weights. And the reason isn't because you don't want to stimulate the muscles. It's because it's going to misdirect your goals. Well, if you gain any kind of muscle or think I'm going to save the muscle that I have from being fat, you will never starve yourself enough to be really skinny. You'll never send that signal to the body that it really is under duress and really needs to consume a lot of the proteins around the body. What'll happen is you'll be one of those formerly fat guys that has a lot of excess skin that also has a tiny amount of muscle that you can't really see because his skin is too loose anyway. You'll be in between both worlds. You won't have the best of any world. The best process is always to go sequentially, to lose all of the fat that you need to lose, and then probably stay skinny for a little bit longer and have long periods of not eating in the day, probably eating once or twice a day during a 4-hour window, and to fast for days in a row, 5 to 7 days in a row, maybe every 2 months or every month, while eating a low protein diet, thereby giving your body the indicator that it does need to commit to autophagy, serious systemic autophagy, the kind of autophagy that will cause that skin to retract. It may not be perfect, but it will retract eventually and lay on you, unless you were like 600 pounds or something like that. Even if you were 300 pounds, you may be able to get the skin completely retracted. Maybe not past the age of 60, and maybe not if you're like 400 or 500 pounds, but if you're reasonably fat and reasonably medium aged, you'll be able to. I was, at least, many times. When I didn't do this, when I tried to keep muscle on me, I would have excess skin around my hips. It would never completely retract. Whereas when I lost the weight completely and got very skinny, eventually the skin retracted. And then when I gained weight again, the same thing happened eventually, but it did retract again when I lost all the weight completely. Anyway, friends, to recap, the reason you're probably not able to get the skin to shrink over time is because your body's not eating the proteins, mainly because of a lack of autophagy. Your body's not systemically targeting the skin. It does not feel that it's under that amount of duress and that it has that little protein consumption that it needs to target the skin specifically. Moreover, because you haven't lost that amount of weight, you haven't gone that skinny, you still have some fat cells. They may be atrophied, but you have fat cells on the interior of your skin that I believe are preventing it from binding back. I believe these two mechanisms are interrelated, such that when the skin has these fat cells, the body is not targeting it as much for autophagy, and when your body's not targeting it for autophagy, it still has those fat cells. It can't go completely back and shrink and also bind to your body. Second, I believe that a sequential process of losing the fat and then gaining the muscle is always superior to trying to manage both goals at the same time. I believe that in people who've lost major amounts of weight but are reasonably aged, that have excess skin, and that are exercising, trying to build muscle or trying to maintain the muscle through their weight loss, don't know what they're doing, and they have the excess skin because of their failures. And finally, I believe that the most important parts of your lifestyle in terms of determining how much skin you lose are how thin you get initially, how much protein you consume in your diet, how long a period you go without eating every day, and how often you fast for several days. Anyway, friends, I don't think that I've heard anyone mention these ideas specifically before. They're sort of ideas I came up with over time, and I hope that they turn out to be useful for you guys that did lose weight and suffer from this problem, or for those that have friends who have. And I really believe these methods are the best way to tackle the problem of excess skin other than surgery. And even if they do get skin reduction surgeries, I believe that they should first follow the principles in this video, because it will be able to limit the invasiveness or the amount of that surgery that they need, a surgery that's highly damaging for the body and their health. Anyway, guys, I'll see you tomorrow morning.